willkommen zurück. Es geht jetzt weiter mit einer Interview-Session. Ich freue mich riesig drauf, jetzt mit Francesca Bria zu sprechen. Sie ist unter anderem Präsidentin des italienischen Nationalen Innovationsfonds. Sie ist seit 2001 Mitglied des Runden Tisches für das neue europäische Bauhaus, eine EU-Initiative rund um Kunst, Kultur, Wissenschaft und Technik, die ja unter anderem auch zur Klimaneutralität Europas beitragen möchte, und seit 2022 Programmdirektorin am New Institute von Hamburg. Und vielleicht waren einige von euch auch bei dem Workshop, der gerade stattgefunden hat, wo sie sich sehr einsetzt für ein neues Verständnis von Daten, öffentlichen Daten und Datenteilen. Sie war davor auch die Innovationsbeauftragte der Stadt Barcelona und hat das Decode-Projekt geleitet, viele wichtige Dinge in diesem Bereich geschaffen und getan. Deswegen freuen wir uns jetzt riesig, dass sie hier ist. We're going to continue in English. Please give a huge round of applause to Francesca Bria. So great to have you here with us today, Francesca.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I just gave a tiny...
Between lunch, no?
Yes.
People are actually probably going to have lunch after this, yeah?
I think my talk was also in competition with the distribution of lunch chips. So.
I see. Okay. Sorry.
But no, it's fantastic to have you here. I just said in German you're doing such important ground-laying work in this area, and you have been for so many years now already, really trying to push to, yeah, let's say a different public data reality and a different framework that we can all work with. So I'd like for you to perhaps fill us in a little bit. I mentioned that you were having a workshop next door and that you're busy in Hamburg trying to push for, let's say, a new public-private contract for data. Can you tell me what your workshop was about and what you're currently working on?
Thank you, Geraldine. First of all, it's really great to be in Berlin, and I think spaces like this are very, very helpful to open up a new imagination about what the future of public service should be looking like. Because I think we always imagine, all the time I talk about public interest and the use of data for public service, for public interest. I think people still have in mind, you know, this kind of closed, non-transparent bureaucratic spaces where policymakers are not really aligned with citizens and communities, and they're there, you know, almost like we have to monitor, we have to block them, you know, gosh, they don't understand. So I think this is also because we need to probably be working, and I hope to inspire, for example, communities like this one to get much more involved in co-designing the future of public digital infrastructures, because at the end, they're not going to have to be like, you know, state-run in the sense that we think about it, but they probably have to really have a big space for community control, of course, for privacy protection, for collective rights, for digital rights, and I think we have to build them in the way that this kind of community is building them, like, you know, free software, open standards, interoperability, data commons, and so on. And I think this is the kind of vocabulary that policymakers not always know. And that's why, you know, you need the kind of CityLab of Berlin and people like you that are working in this field practices from the ground up to make sure that this vocabulary becomes public sector vocabulary. I hope this is not too far from what we are doing, but I think it should be what I expected. And then I also want to say that probably this contract, you're talking, this citizen contract over data, I mean, for us is also a way to talk a bit more about why we need digital public infrastructures and data. So the end, it's not the data in itself. I mean, the end is to make sure that Berlin becomes a city where you have more affordable housing, where you have, you know, better air quality, more public space, green areas, where you're managing to go to net zero, decarbonize the city, have more pedestrian spaces, grow more greens, you know, have a sustainable mobility. So we really want to make sure we're tackling people's problems. Because sometimes I always feel, and I guess you are also on the same page, that if it still remains a conversation between technology experts, that's not what we want. I mean, obviously, I think in order to deliver better mobility, better healthcare, a better education, affordable housing, we know that today you have to do it through digital public infrastructures and a different democratic deal over data. So that's why we're doing that. And I think we never have to kind of lose the objective, which is about the big challenges that we're facing in society and not about technology in itself.
So in a way, this idea of the smart city where people who govern it are informed by data and can make appropriate decisions, but also where citizens can have different checks and balances because they're informed and also enabled to partake in the knowledge that comes out of the different sort of data available, seems very tangible and very realistic. And on the other hand, it seems like that's incredibly far away, especially living in a city like Berlin. How are you approaching having these conversations with different stakeholders within the city and having them, perhaps see how to move toward this idea, this image that smart city is not something that means just profit, proprietized data for different commercial applications, but really this idea of a different public sphere of data?
Well, I think the reason why I still find it very exciting to work with cities, although I now have different kind of roles because I'm not anymore the city of Barcelona. I work with Hamburg at the moment, and I advise, a few cities here and there, also through the United Nations. But I find it interesting because with cities you can touch, this utility, this value of the data, because as I was saying before, it's really about improving people's life. And on another level, I think you touch upon one thing that's very dear to me, which is about improving democracy, because at the end, we know that also the business models and what we are seeing with digital platforms, surveillance capitalism, lack of trust, data monopolies, has really been at the core, I think, of almost a break, a rupture of the kind of liberal democracy contract. So it is a danger to our democratic life, to our democratic participation. And I think in a setting, in a scale like a city, obviously to have this community participation and citizen participation in decision making about what the city is doing, it's key. And that's why in Barcelona we combined, as you know, the two things of citizen participation, data democracy, and then you're orienting that towards environmental issues and so on. And I still think, here that's the thing, like getting the city makers to understand, to basically open up to the fact that citizen participation and having citizens and communities involved in decision making about how they spend money, what's happening, what are the big projects, it's key, because otherwise these projects will not happen or they will become maybe a problem for the city itself. Now, in Hamburg, for example, we have been focusing on a subject that maybe you want to touch upon because it seems to be very controversial somehow. But to me, it's very natural, which is like in a moment where we have such concentration of power with data and technology. I mean, me being a data economist and innovation economist, I've been working on this many years. I think we have seen very rarely, even in the history of the Industrial Revolution, unprecedented concentration of industrial power, which is also social power and political power, in the hands of very few players. So obviously we have a problem. And if we talk about AI later, this is becoming even worse, like 3 companies on the planet that are able, to basically provide services for all humanity, one single interface that we will use to do everything. I mean, is this like a vision for our reality that we want to accept? I don't think so. So that's why I keep talking about a social contract that's missing here. And in Hamburg, we're like looking at this private data to society for the public interest. So how about, if you're using public infrastructures, if you're using the public, the public space, how about, or in public procurement, for example, how about that the data that you collect, it's not your data as a company, but it's like actually community data is in the public domain because the citizens are paying taxes to receive the service. And we own the public space, it's not owned by the provider of the service. So it's like, it sounds like a very basic concept, but when you say it and when you try to do it, oh my God, then you open up the Pandora's box the black box, yeah, because it's a black box, in fact, a lot of it. And so what we are trying to do with a big group of experts, many of them are around, some economists, data experts, lawyers, community people, and so on, is to try to see, okay, the legal, policy, regulatory, and technical work, try to create blueprints and explain how, for example, this is possible, how we should do it, how cities have to do it. And I already said to the state secretary here that I will be very happy to go and work with her team and explain how to do it in Berlin. I mean, let's basically, my thing is get it done. Yeah, let's get it done.
This is great news and something that some of us have also been lobbying for quite some time now. So this is great to hear that things, that we might be able to tap into some of the great work you've did and get things moving in this city as well. So part of it is understanding the data the public sector has and the value of that and open sourcing that and seeing how to create a level playing field where citizens can benefit, of course also companies can benefit, but perhaps in a tiered public sector interest way. And another part of it is unlocking the data that's in the private sector hand and seeing how we can make public use of that, as you said, by different procurement rules, by different data sharing agreements, etc. And maybe we can share some examples of that in a minute. I was at a conversation yesterday of the Digitale Salon and saying, you know, how I also benefit from Google services and how much I would like to be able to have a different place to say, oh, I'm stuck in a traffic jam, or, oh, this was a great restaurant. And a person from the audience commented saying, but did you really want that kind of information in the hand of the public sector? Look at all of our history in Germany and all the fears connected to having our private data or having data that can be associated with us in some way in the public hand.
I mean, that's the thing. I think this is the battlefield, is to reclaim the public as, you know, us, as publicly owned, as in terms of democratic control. I think if we give up this idea and all the time we talk about what is the public, we think about Orban. I mean, sorry, I'm Italian, like, we also have think problems, about Italy. You know?
No,
and, you know, so I think the only hope is to make sure that what we say it's public is actually broader than the state. You know, and this is all the debate about the common good, what are commons, how to integrate citizens, how to make sure that communities are there, how to make sure that, for example, you guys are engaged in these decisions. So what is the public? I mean, as you know, and that's why probably it has been working nicely, the Barcelona example, is because at the beginning we elected the mayor, Ada Colau, that she was coming from the housing movement. So she was really a grassroots activist reclaiming and fighting for affordable housing, and she got elected and she became the mayor of Barcelona. And she came to us, to the civic hackers, to the people, and so on, saying, I want to do a policy that's about participatory democracy, because I want to decide together with the people and also give me the tools to do that. And obviously with DCD in Barcelona, which is the participatory democracy platform, we didn't tell Ada Colau, oh well, use Facebook, so you know, you just use a commercial platform. No, we built an open source platform where the data is owned by the citizens, where you can monitor what is happening in the power. So it's this idea, it's a little bit like investigative journalism. I mean, we have, you know, it's like what we have a power with check and balances. Like we should be able to monitor what's happening and we should be able to influence the decision making that's happening there. I mean, I think this is a big important thing, because how are we gonna solve the climate emergency if we're not part of this? How? Yeah. You know, so if we start saying, well, but the government, you know, this could then become a dictatorship and so on. Yes, and it's to avoid that we need to be at the center space of the political life. Exactly to avoid that we are again into this kind of right-wing, extreme right-wing populism, and we see again, you know, these problems in Europe. And I think that's why probably we have to start taking this, I mean, not always as a reactive problem, oh my God, why do you trust the government? Why don't we show what a digital public infrastructure should be looking like, that have privacy, ethics, security, protection by design that are more decentralized and distributed, that operate according to certain standards. And those democracy standards, let's try to enforce them in the way we develop infrastructures. I mean, I think this is a proactive approach, and it's not about, okay, why do you trust, you know, the public? Then, obviously, I think there are all this legislation in place. For example, the GDPR is there to protect our rights and so on. But I also think, and it shouldn't be seen in opposition, for example, to create data commons and enable public decision-making around how do we use this data to tackle, you know, the climate crisis. Because otherwise, you know, we are basically going against our public interest, our collective interests. And so I think this is a conversation where probably Europe is the only one, and I still believe, and I invite you also when we work with cities to think more in networks. Because imagine, like now, for example, sitting there's the city of Barcelona, the city of Bologna, they're here, the city of Hamburg, and so on, and here I know you have many more. If we manage to then standardize across different cities, creating common ontologies, creating common use cases, make it run this data sharing across cities, then, you know, we may have interoperable digital public services for people, for the environment in Europe running.
Yeah.
Like running, because again, I think we are a bit sick of words. I mean, we want these principles and value to be translated in actual operation, I mean, actual services that work and we can use. We need alternatives in place right now.
I am such a fan of this idea, and that's also what the Decidim network is about, providing these open source infrastructures, but I feel this is such a hard concept to sell to politicians and leading administrators, because everybody wants to reinvent the wheel. And we have that in Berlin on the city level, but also on the district level, and so many of those conversations, obviously hoping there will be a growing understanding for the need of this as there are growing pressures of climate change, etc. But how do you sell this idea to politicians who want to continuously reinvent the wheel and have thought of it first and only?
Well, I think we could ask these politicians if it's working the way they're doing it now. Maybe not. So I think this should be the first, like the starting point. Is it actually working? Is it delivering value? Is it delivering public interest? If it's a mess, and I also think, you know, all the time, we are there to fix the mess only after the mess happened. You know, I remember this, I mean, you know how many years we are in this business of like commons and against surveillance capitalism. I remember a few years ago, before Snowden, before Assange, before this whole debate, people were asking, yeah, but what is the problem? Where is the dead body? We were like, yeah, but maybe we want to do it before the dead body, right? But no, we're waiting the mess to happen, and then we are called to clean the mess. And usually it's too late to fix the mess after it happened. So why don't we do it before? Why don't we try to make it work differently before the mess happens? So I think with policymakers, just to be practical, because otherwise, let's show use cases that work. I mean, in Hamburg, we're working on something on mobility. Barcelona has done a lot of things in other areas. Let's also show the added value with some concrete stories. I mean, more than use cases is stories. Stories where people show that, okay, you know, this has been working, this is working well, let's scale it up. Because at the end, that's how the CDIM scaled up, and now it's used by the European Commission, it becomes a de facto platform, and so on. We show it works, then other cities using it, it works, and it's scaling up. Because at the end, we want this to be scaling up. And I think there are some efforts going in the right direction. For example, digital building blocks like the digital ID scheme. I know that they negotiated until 5 a.m. last night, so I haven't seen the final text, but there are very good people from the Commission and negotiating a cryptographic identity scheme from Europe. So, you know, like very kind of strongly protecting our data, but at the same time allowing this to be pan-European. We have data spaces with privacy protection, but also try to build a European data infrastructure. The digital euro will be a reality, and we'll have to make sure this also protects privacy and so on. So I think we're building some basic building blocks on top of which, we can create interoperable public digital services that are, available for citizens. So I think this is the direction, and I still believe that the European model will be this one. I mean, aligned with democracy and values, having fundamental rights, citizen participation, the planet at the very core of what we do, but at the same time more decentralized, starting here from the cities, from the citizens, because there is no way to do it top-down only.
So
that will be a mistake.
Do you think these new infrastructures are going to support creating a more level playing field also when it comes to future AI applications? I saw this tweet the other day where somebody was celebrating the great selection of French restaurants, Parisian restaurants offered by Google's new Bard, when it was like, well, no, Sherlock, millions of people are feeding their favorite restaurants to Google every day. It's not rocket science in there. So how is there any chance for the public sector to catch up to that?
Well, I think, first of all, and we should have people like Kate Crawford and other people working critically on AI come and talk to policymakers to go against this kind of enchanted determinism about AI. I think this is the first thing, and I think we keep debunking this kind of technological determinism for many years, technological solutionism. Now we have enchanted determinism, and it's really, I think we should refuse this kind of long-termism and this maybe racist ideas about which are underpinning some of these AI developments. So there is a task there to do. And then, of course, I think there is a question, massive question about infrastructures that really to be posed at a very European level, federal level, because it's impossible. I mean, those systems, they change completely as they scale. So this probabilistic, because it's applied statistics, that's what it is, but the probabilistic output, they change massively if they scale up. So we don't even design these systems, these language models, we grow them, and then as they scale, they change the output. So this is a massive, a massive kind of challenge for regulation to rethink trust, to rethink authority, to rethink what algorithmic accountability is in that space. But those infrastructures, obviously, I think Europe needs these infrastructures in place. And so the collaboration with research centers, the type of Fraunhofer, the big hyperscale, we need them here. Because at the end, who is going to prioritize healthcare or climate instead of luxury restaurants? The public. We need to prioritize climate, healthcare, and education over luxury goods. I think this is a task for society. If we let the big companies do it, where do they make more money? Selling us luxury products. So, sorry, it's like the same problem. We can't let the market, and also the market is getting into a very monopolistic place. And I think, so again, it's a big task now to not let this kind of AI go on one side. This is, this determinism, understand what it is. And I think also, and I'm not sure if there is anyone in this room, I will be very interested, there is going to be, again, a massive discussion about what is copyright in this space. Yeah. Because now, for example, we have creators, and I think this is great because also we need production of good information and content to be very prioritized, and there are creators that are coming together to protect. Now there is a project, Matt and Holly Herndon, they're doing a project with artists, and they have 1.4 billion artworks, where the artists are taking it out from the AI system. They want the right to opt out from the artwork to be, analyzed by AI without their consent and without a compensation back. Yeah, so a revolution in the AI, because at the moment we are, we get everything, our images, our knowledge, our content, basically taken by these systems. We own nothing. We own literally nothing. So I think this is a massive, now again, reclaiming back public knowledge, public power over what's happening
Absolutely.
with
I mean, Holly Herndon is fantastic, and everybody should check out her work. And also, super recommending Cory Doctorow's and Rebecca Giblin's new book, Choke Point Capitalism, on exactly this topic, because it explains these dynamics so well, but also how we can break out of them. And that's maybe also a good point to say none of this is a like economy or private sector unfriendly conversation. This is a conversation attacking the monopolies that we've built and the opposite of free markets that we have today. I want to squeeze in.
Just to finish on this point, because I guess a lot of SMEs and startups and innovators and designers and creators and artists will be on our side on this conversation. So it doesn't have to look like you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly that. This is very important. I mean, it's really the future of our economy, to make it more sustainable, to share the value better, to make it more inclusive, and to give a chance to the creativity that's actually part of our economy to really emerge.
Absolutely, especially in such a creative industry city as Berlin. I want to squeeze in a tiny last question, but you're going to have to give me a list because we're nearly out of time. So sometimes we look over a little bit jealously from Berlin to Hamburg and think like, oh, they have better procurement laws, and oh, look, they did this thing with like e-mobility where it seems so much more of a structured work between private and public sector. So give me 3 things that the new Berlin city government can do that we can learn from Hamburg in terms of data sharing and preparing for this AI world. What are the top 3?
Well, 3 things. Well, I actually think one thing could be this, looking more at the creative community of Berlin and talking more with creators about what's happening, because we talk a lot about urban data, but definitely AI is about data of all forms, which is also content and creativity and so on. And I think that's maybe where Berlin could be pioneering. And then I think on the other side, we are now building this use case ontology for data sharing with Barcelona and Hamburg. Why not having Berlin on board so we can do it together? And then we are designing also a kind of data public service or data public interest intermediary, like as a possibility to share the data, and Berlin could be pioneering that design, which has not been applied yet, so why not? I mean, I think Berlin has a very strong community. And while the city really struggles sometimes to implement the things, the community is doing it. And these debates, I mean, many years, I always see Berlin as a kind of avant-garde, always happening here first. So I still think you have a big chance to, you know, kind of making it happen, becoming part of this network, and why not having the CityLab to drive forward this kind of collaboration?
Exactly. I would love to see all of that happen, and I hope that we're going to see lots more of you in Berlin to support these processes. It was fantastic to have you here today, Francesca. Let's have a big round of applause, please.